All right, good morning, everybody. Today we have host architecture and learn about a career in architecture. So first, let's do a check-in. Make sure that you check in first so that your teacher knows that you are here. And if you have questions, this is a great questions documents to reference to. And this is the most important thing. You need to do the evaluation right after this event. So pay attention, be present, make sure to put your questions in the chat so we can learn a lot more on the career in architecture. And again, your evaluation is very important. This is your attendance, and this is how we give you credit. And this is a requirement for you to graduate in high school. And that is it for me. Let's have Jake Watkins and Ken Riddle at Holst to talk about their career.
Good morning. How's everybody doing today? So I think we want to start with just a quick, brief introduction of ourselves. My name is Ken Riddle. I've been an architect for about 10 years now, a licensed architect for about 10 years now, and been practicing in the field for over 15 years. I have a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from the University of Texas at San Antonio and a 2 years master's degree from the University of Oregon. And I've been working with Holst for, I believe, 5 years now, 5.5 years.
Great. And I'm Jake Watkins. I have been working professionally in architecture for 5 years. I have a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies from the University of Vermont. So my bachelor's degree is not directly related to architecture. And then I have a 3-year Master of Architecture also from the University of Oregon. And so later on in this talk, we'll go through some of the education tracks that can get you to this point. But and then I've been at Holst for about actually the same time as Ken. We started at Holst right around the same time. Yep. Let's see, I can share, let's see. Trying to find the share my screen. Oh, there it is. Perfect. Ken, are you seeing that?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so we put together a little bit of a slideshow here to talk about what it is that we do as architects. And most of the examples in here are examples of work done by Holst Architecture here in Portland, or in the Northwest at least. Okay, so within the field of architecture, there are kind of multiple subsets that all work together to create projects. So many of you probably think of architecture as specifically just buildings or new buildings, but there's kind of some more factors to it. And so one of the really important fields in what we do is landscape architecture. The individuals involved in landscape architecture tend to be have different degrees. There are specific degrees for landscape architecture, although that's not always the case, but they're really an integral part of the projects that we do. No project can kind of just stand alone in space. They need to be grounded with landscape. And so these are 3 examples of what a landscape architect might do. On the left there is kind of an interior courtyard, plaza, and playground for a project we did here in Portland. So that one's a lot more about hardscape and really active use. The middle example here is a roof deck of a project in Northeast Portland. And this one's, it's a lot about planting, about vegetation, about creating little zones up there for active use outdoors. And then the example on the right is kind of a standalone project. So while they often collaborate with us, oftentimes landscape architects have projects of their own. And so, and those tend to be civic in nature, so for public use. And so the example on the right here is of a large park with an amphitheater and a stage and areas to walk and lawn areas to play. Let's see. Another important kind of subset of architecture is interior architecture and design. Now, interior architecture and design, there are specific degrees for interior architecture. So some folks can choose that path and become very specialized about interior spaces, both kind of creating the space, but then also what we call FF&E, so adding furniture and art and vegetation and lighting, and so there's a whole side of the profession that's really specialized in that. But as architects, as kind of generalists, we also work with interiors all the time, and it's an important part of what we do. Interiors can kind of at times be their own project. So there's a lot of renovation work in architecture, which I'll talk about next, but interiors tends to be a really important part of that. And then it's also a very important part of kind of ground up new projects. And to be a really successful project, the exterior and the interior of the building really need to be designed together to be cohesive and have a similar design language. As I mentioned, renovations are a big part of what we do. You know, buildings tend to have a lifespan of you hope at a minimum of 50 years, but much longer than that, ideally. The longer a building lasts, honestly, the better its carbon footprint is, the better it is for the environment. But of course, as you can imagine, over that time, the use of the building or the needs of tenants probably changes. And so a building that, for instance, this one in the middle that was originally designed for some sort of industrial use is now the Center for Architecture in Portland. So it's more of a gallery art space. And so we renovated that building a number of years ago to kind of spruce up the exterior, but more importantly, renovate the interior to make it a usable space for its current need. On the left, here's an image of there's an interior kind of cafe there. I believe that's at the Dan Fout Center at Nike, which was a large renovation project to update their space for kind of modern needs for their current workforce, which is a lot different than when the building was built decades ago. And then the building on the right here, that was mostly what we call a reskin. And so the exterior of the building was updated to kind of modernize it, put in new windows so that it was more sustainable, and kind of spruce it up, if you will, and kind of bring it into the current century. And then we have our new build projects, which is a majority of, at least holds to what we do. And so these are projects from the ground up. Sometimes they're on site that's never really been touched before. For example, the Newberg house here on the left, that is a highly sustainable single-family residential project, kind of on new land. And then you have your more urban projects, like the one here in the middle, Open School out in East Portland, and one north here on the right in North Portland, both of which were constructed on sites that had previous uses that were no longer needed. And so we call those kind of urban infill. And so these are projects that we start and work through every phase of the project. Ken's going to kind of run through the various phases of the projects that we work on. But these are ones where we would really integrate with a landscape architect, with interiors, whether it's we do that ourselves or work with an interior designer. We work with structural engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers, kind of the whole gamut. So and you're going to jump into phases here?
Yeah, so there are four kind of main phases of a project. There's that we'll get into. There's SD, DD, CDs, and then CA. And the first part of all that is procurement, and that is getting the project. And there's a lot that goes into getting the project. One of the big things is really being prepared and knowing what you're going after and who you're speaking to when you're going after the project. A lot of these projects come to our office based on prior relationships that we've had with clients or individuals that worked at one place and moved to another. So one of the really key things in architecture is to have a good relationship, a good personal, professional working relationship with people, and being able to really understand what they're looking for and what they need out of a project. There's a lot of things that we do as architects that vary on a day-to-day basis, which we'll kind of touch on later in the day or later in the presentation. But it's really about understanding your clients and knowing what they're looking for. And in the procurement parts, there are a client will want to put together a project. Depending on what type of client is, they'll issue an RFQ, which is a request for qualifications, or an RFP, request for proposal. And the architects will put together a presentation or a documentation or something that can go after that project and help the office kind of team together to get that work. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. There's a lot of report writing and kind of investigation of some of the program requirements and some of the elements of the project that, if it's a new project to us, we'd want to understand what that is. So if we're doing a performing arts center, we may want to do a little research on performing arts center, or if there's some kind of clients that we could team up with, or consultants that we could team up with, and that's something that we want to do. So part of it too is, as you can see in the bottom screen, is making models and really relaying what we're doing, what we want to do and what our vision is to the client. And everything is really rough and diagrammatic and kind of open for a conversation. But it's, at the end of the day, it's really about having a strong relationship with people and building trust early on with the client to get the project. And after we get the project, excuse me, we start the work. And schematic design, a lot of times, it's kind of the fun part of the project. It's really loose, it's open. Us as professionals have a better idea as to what the client is looking for. So we're able to kind of move forward with different ideas and different interpretations of those goals and visions. And they start with loose sketches, like the one you're seeing on the screen here, just general big ideas, big kind of goals that we define with the client to really understand what they're looking for and what they want their space to be. We take this time to get an idea, what their vision is and what they want the building to kind of look like, and what function they want it to serve. And this is a really kind of a deep dive investigation process for some project types. I think whenever you get into some housing things where there's a little more of a known factor, then we can kind of jump in a little quicker to solve some of those things. But like a project like this, I believe this was 72 Foster, Jake, is that correct? There was a diverse client base with this one. So there's a lot of different parties going into this project type. So we had to really understand the different needs of each of those clients. And, so that's part of the process as well. It's the fun sketching part, the investigation, and figuring out all the programmatic requirements that need to go into the building to make it a successful project as we move into design development. And so the next slide. Excuse me. So design development is the area where we start to get a little more realistic about the project. Things start to become a little more defined, a little more rigid in a sense, based on what we had before with the previous loose sketches. We start to really dial in the square footage requirements of certain things. We start to investigate areas based on state code and national code, and a lot of times energy code, depending on where the project is. And this is where we really dial in some of the details as well, and kind of focus on, what the overhangs for a building would be at the ground floor and how it kind of meets the ground, and really begin to understand if we're hitting the targets for the clients and their goals and needs on the project. And at this point, although we're starting to get dialed in, we're not completely finished. So there's a lot of things that can change and evolve as we move through the project, but the bones are there and the big pieces are there to kind of move forward. And that would take us into construction documents. And in the construction documents portion of our profession, this is where a lot of projects kind of become great projects and easy projects in CA, or really challenging projects. And this is where you kind of need all hands on with a project, and have a knowledgeable person that can work with understanding how a building goes together. So this is the area where we've understood what the building needs to look like, and this is when we start to put it together and really understand how it goes together. A lot of times we will work with a contractor early on if we have a construction manager, general contractor on board. And that makes things easier sometimes, but there's a lot of times where we are preparing documents that go out for a bid to contractors that would just want to work on the projects. And those are the times when we need to make sure that our details cover everything as they go out for pricing, and really make sure all of the structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, civil, landscape, and all the architectural elements are covered in the project, so that we have an easier process as we move into construction administration. So when we get into CA, this is kind of where everything becomes real. This is where everything starts to grow out of the ground and become a real building. And this is when we work with the contractor. We continue to work with the client to really understand it, make sure that we're not missing things, and we're kind of covering every detail that we've discussed to make sure things don't get lost along the way. There's a lot of times where in CA, there's a gap between construction documents and CA where the project goes into bid and permit as well. And sometimes the bids will come in a little bit higher, and we'll have to scale things back and start a value engineering process, which is basically kind of a reduction in sometimes materials or quality. Hopefully it's not a reduction in space a lot of times, but some of the materials that we end up using are not always what we want to use. So we want to make sure that we're holding on to the big ideas and the big picture things, so that we can have the best project as possible that we can. So in CA, there's things happen every single day, and there's a lot of interaction on site with the contractor. Typically, we have on-site meetings weekly, and that was kind of all pre-COVID. That's changed a little bit now. We do a lot of meetings like this, virtual meetings, but a lot of on-site interaction, walking through, looking at what's being done. We don't really do any kind of inspections on site, but we do kind of a lot of review just to make sure that things are conforming with the construction documents, contract documents. And we answer a lot of RFIs, which are requests for information, which is a way to clarify things that may not be clear in a drawing, or that we may have missed, or that a contractor may have missed as well. And there's also a round of submittals that come through. And the submittal process is really about the final review of materials going into the building, and making sure that those are in line with the contract documents, and just confirming that they match with everybody's goal and intent, so we can get a final product that everyone is happy with.
Awesome. Here's just a quick image of our office here in Portland, and kind of what one of our, we call pods, looks like. So it's a very open office, very collaborative. We have pinup boards where you can see a lot of sketches and ideas up over here, and teams can get together and talk when we're in the office. As Ken mentioned, we're kind of in a hybrid work mode these days with a lot of folks at home, but this is our typical office culture.
So yeah, so on a day-to-day basis, ideally we're all working in the office. That's when it's the collaboration's the best. Working from home has been a bit of a challenge the past year and a half or so, but we've managed to do a pretty good job of continuing to collaborate. There's lots of different ways to collaborate, but getting to the root of what we do a lot of it is making things and coming up with ideas out of nowhere, really, a lot of times, or taking something that another person had kind of half baked or kind of thought of initially and taking it to the next step. So in this project here, there was a client that had a really strong desire of a building type that they wanted. And our team was able to kind of take that and extract it a little bit and make it into something different. And so these forms are general representations of what the initial idea was, but they're really different in the end result. And part of this was through an iteration process of the middle one has a setup with Sketchup, which Jake will talk about later on in the project or in the presentation. But using SketchUp as a background and doing sketching overlays. So the image at the top kind of gets to some of those really rough, loose ideas again. And then the image at the bottom is more of like a final presentation that we would do for schematic design or early design development to really kind of present the ideas that we want to have in the project. And that's all part of the making process. And along with that, there's 3D modeling, like visual hands-on 3D modeling, and also 3D rendering SketchUp modeling. So we do a lot of making in the day that is hands-on and also digital. And researching is a huge part of being an architect. Things change, and I think the world that we're living in now, things change really quickly. And there's always new materials to understand. And being an architect, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're doing the best that we can for our client and really understanding new materials and digging into them to make sure that they're acceptable for the project that we're working on. There's a lot of new things out there that aren't very durable or aren't very environmentally friendly. So there's a lot of research and digging that goes into making sure that what we're providing for the building is adequate and long lasting and will meet the client's needs long term. And researching goes from anything to materials, as I mentioned, to code review, accessibility review, and also project types, really understanding what goes into a drug treatment center or an elderly housing center or a performing arts center. And I think one of the great things about being an architect is we're always solving problems, and we're always finding new ways to solve those problems and kind of digging into it to come up with creative solutions and hopefully innovative solutions that, again, are durable and long lasting and hopefully timeless as well. So for the next part, collaboration. Collaboration is another really key aspect to being an architect. And again, it's been a bit of a challenge with COVID the past year and a half again. But the idea of working as a team to solve a problem is always, maybe not always, but it most of the time it results in the best results. Everybody's coming to the table with different ideas, different visions, different goals, different experiences, different perspectives. And I think our office has done an excellent job of really listening to different people and allowing room for those discussions to be had in an open forum so that we can kind of get the best out of the project. We really want to make sure that everybody feels kind of empowered and involved in the project. And the best way to do that is to give people ownership of a project. And if someone feels like their ideas are being heard or listened to and responded to, then that's where the best projects come from. Sometimes there's architecture firms where it's one person that does everything and everybody kind of below them does more of the grunt work. But I think Holst is one of those great places where everybody does everything, and to the detriment sometimes it can be overwhelming, but we all learn, we all grow from it, and it's a great way to really make the best work in an office. And collaborating is incredibly important. Being able to work as a team, being able to communicate clearly, and listening. Listening is extremely important. Understanding where people come from. We've spent some time in our office to come up with a community agreements, and that was a huge collaborative effort. And that's something that gets used for every single thing that we do, so that everybody is intentionally collaborating every time they're working on a project with someone.
Thanks, Ken. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about the educational requirements for architecture. And as you heard at the beginning, so Ken and I both have in the end the same degree, but we went about it kind of in different ways. So first, the big picture with architecture. Ken talked a little bit there in this last part about making. That is a huge part of what architecture school is. The later phases of projects, you gain some knowledge in through courses, but the real experience in architecture school is about making. And so this image here on the right is the first of several examples that we have of what an architecture studio kind of looks like. So these tend to be large open spaces with desks, as you see. They're always very messy, just like this. And it's a lot of model making and drawing and what we call desk crits. So professors coming around and looking at your work a couple days a week and talking through your project and where you're headed and collaborating with classmates. And it's a really fun environment. It's also can be a very stressful environment, and a lot of very long nights, often overnights, especially when you get towards the end of term and have big reviews coming up, which is when you pin your work up and professors or professionals from the surrounding area come and critique your work. And so you present your term project, and you get feedback on it. And so it's I think I had a professor in my undergrad when I was thinking about going to grad school who told me that architecture is not for the faint of heart. And I think he was very right in that, and that it can be incredibly rewarding, it can be incredibly fun, but especially school, it's you have to have a passion for it, I think, to really excel. But it can be, if you do, it can be a lot of fun. So some of the paths to kind of getting into the field of architecture, because you do need some level of education to get into this field. A four-year undergraduate BA in architecture is one way. This is kind of the lowest tier, and I think has some difficulties surrounding eventual licensure. But there are many people who have a four-year undergraduate, a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture, who work within the field but don't really have the drive or feel the need to become a licensed architect and do very well within the field. Okay, the next is a 5-year undergraduate Bachelor of Architecture, which is all of these programs. I'll talk about this when we look at schools, but it's important to know that there's an accreditation process for architecture programs. And so the school that you go to having an accredited degree is really important for the future of your career and the ability to be licensed. But a 5-year undergraduate Bachelor of Architecture, a BArch, allows you to get licensed without the need for graduate school. So this is a very common path for folks. It makes your college experience a year longer, but you don't have the requirement of an additional years of grad school, which can obviously be, it's expensive and more time consuming. But this is one way I know many folks in the profession who have gone this route. On the right, again, you see another example of a studio. Like I said, they're always very messy. Looks like in this case, everyone's building some pretty large scale models to study some sort of space. The third option here, this was Ken's path. So this is a 4-year undergraduate degree in architecture, and then a 2-year Master's of Architecture program. This is also very common. So for those folks who did path one here, the 4-year undergraduate BA in architecture, but then it was important to them to learn more and to have the ability to become licensed, as Ken has. This is a very common path for that. Some people do this at the same school. A lot of folks, though, will get their Bachelor of Architecture somewhere and then some work for a couple of years and then go to a different program for their Master's of Architecture. Some go right away, but still want to go somewhere different just to get more of a varied education. Every architecture program is different. And so some are very theory-based, where they talk a lot about history and theory of architecture. Some, like the University of Oregon, is a lot more practical in their education, I would say, and with a heavy focus on sustainability. And so when you're looking at schools, it's important to also understand what they kind of specialize in and what their programs are like. The image here on the right is of a crit, as I was mentioning, a pinup. And so this student is presenting, I don't know the specifics of this one, but this could be a midterm pinup or a final. So could have been working on this for several months and presenting it to a jury of professionals who are going to critique it. And then this is the path I took. So I have a 4-year undergraduate degree, a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies, and decided during my undergraduate education that I wanted to go to architecture school, but didn't want to leave my undergraduate education or prolong my bachelor's experience. So I decided to complete my bachelor's and then do a 3-year Master of Architecture program. And so in this instance, I went to college in Vermont, and then I came out to Oregon, to the University of Oregon specifically, because the program was really focused on sustainability. And so that really drew me out here. And so this is another degree that allows you to get licensed. And there's another image here of another studio. So they all, I don't think I've ever seen an architecture studio that I couldn't tell was an architecture studio. They all, of course, have their own. Some are fancier than others. Some are, in older buildings. But the spirit of them and the culture that surrounds studio, no matter who you talk to in the profession, everyone understands what architecture studios are like. Some of it, and sometimes you miss them. So quickly, just where to get your degree. So I mentioned earlier, it's a couple important factors in deciding where which program to go to. One is always make sure that you understand the accreditation status of your school. That's an ongoing process. So it's not that you get accredited once and you're accredited forever. Schools are constantly having to prove that they're up to certain standards to maintain their accreditation. A lot of that includes sharing student work and large evaluation processes. But so it's important to really understand the current accreditation status of any school that you're looking at. And then the second, as I mentioned previously, is that every program is just really different. And so understanding what their core values are, what their students from there have gone on to do after is important. And then there's, of course, a million other factors when deciding which university or college is right for you outside of just the program. But in this case, those are the two really important things to look at. This is a renovation project on the Nike campus. All right, and so now the money talk. So architecture is a career that pays a living wage, certainly, but it's not necessarily going to get you rich. And so it's certainly a career that, there's a lot of schooling involved to get there, but it can also be incredibly rewarding. But I do think that you have to have a certain level of passion for the work that you do. And that passion doesn't necessarily need to mean that you like making pretty buildings. I personally am very passionate about the nonprofit work that we do. We do a lot of affordable housing and work with a lot of local nonprofits. And so I find immense joy and reward in doing that work. But you certainly can make a very comfortable living wage. And as you can see here, like with most careers, over time that increases. And so the entry level salaries are not amazing, but you can pretty quickly grow that. And then we just have some numbers up here, and take these with a grain of salt because we pulled these off of a recruitment database. So these obviously vary by region and aren't entirely accurate, but here in comparison are some other kind of entry level average salaries for some of the, you know, bigger careers. So a teacher, a data analyst, an engineer, and a doctor. All of which obviously have different educational requirements, different, you know, so you'll be coming into them in different scenarios as far as student loans and all those kinds of things. So there's a lot to factor in here, but this is just kind of a brief overview of the salary possibilities within architecture.
So is architecture for you? That's kind of the whole point of this presentation. I think one of the great things about architecture, is we've been talking about, is there's lots of different paths to becoming an architect and being an architect. If you're a really creative person, an artistic person, there's definitely a path for you to become an architect. There's lots of different medium that you can do to produce, you know, really interesting, cool designs. You know, there's lots of hands-on building, as we talked about with model making, as you can see in this image, and watercolors and markers. So, you know, if you're someone that really loves to sketch and draw and loves design and loves really understanding, you know, how to make something better and more useful, you know, this could potentially be a great career path for you, because there's lots of avenues to really express that in all different scales. And, you know, one of the great things about architecture is you can work on, a couple summers ago, I worked on a library in a basement that was 1,000 square feet. And now I'm working on an apartment building that's 120,000 square feet. So the jump in scale varies significantly, but there's a lot of craft and design and thoughtfulness that goes into each of those spaces. And they can be magnified however you want based on your ability and desire to really work through that in a creative way. In construction, if you're more of a out in the field, hands-on kind of person, then construction might be a great path for you as well. One of the things that I really get to do a lot in my role at Holst is do a lot of construction administration, and the paperwork isn't always the most fun. It can be really stressful and anxiety inducing, but I love being out on site. I love walking through the buildings. I love seeing the three-dimensional spaces that we've created and have drawn. It's really kind of inspiring, and it's humbling as well to think that, you know, a group of 5 or 6 people can come up with something that's gonna hopefully change someone's life or improve someone's lives, people's lives, and make it better. And if we can kind of do that through documentation, creativity, and construction, that's great. And I love being out on site and just really seeing the process. And again, I always like to say, watching the building grow out of the ground. That's one of my favorite things to do. Technology is another evolving thing that's really exciting about the profession. There's lots of people that have a tremendous skill set in being able to work in three-dimensional programs like SketchUp and Rhino and Revit. And I know there's a few others out there that I'm completely unaware of at this point in my career. But we're starting to get into 3D model making and being able to produce something in SketchUp that can be printed out in 3 dimensions and shown to the client. So you get that really kind of tactile, tangible thing that a client can see. And it takes someone that's really dedicated to the technology process to really understand how that works and how to make it efficient and effective for an office to use. But they become incredibly valuable as we move into, you know, newer generations and newer technical things. That, you know, one of the big the big steps that we had a few years ago was we had an Oculus in the office, and we were able to kind of walk through buildings, and that was a huge deal for clients to be able to see a space before it was built, to be able to walk in it and look around it, and look down and look up. So there's a path for technology. There's also a path for sustainability. If you're someone that's really into finding ways to kind of help our environment and improve our way of life and improve the materials that go into buildings. We have a great sustainability group in our office that they review every project, and they try to find ways that we can make projects better for the environment through materials, through siding, that locating on the site, what I mean by siding, and through just kind of general openings in the building, and really understanding how the building sits on the site, how it interacts with its community. There's lots of different layers to sustainability, and I think this is something where if you really have a desire to improve the environmental buildings or the built environment in our area, this is something that you could easily jump into and really navigate and become a critical player in your role in the office. The next one is community engagement. And this is something that a lot of architects have historically not been the best at. I think we're really improving on this overall and reaching out to communities and finding out what's best for them and what they really want out of a project. There's a lot of times where an architect's office will kind of come in and kind of dictate how things are done. I think us as an office, we're trying to be better about that and really listen to a community and find out what they need and what they want for the building, and really working through the people of a neighborhood and of a community, and understanding what makes that community special and what goes into making that community unique, and kind of setting up a successful path for us as architects to solve a problem with that in mind. And it can involve kids, it can involve people, our age, teenagers, older and senior citizens, people of all age, and from all walks of life are involved in these community engagement processes. And so if that's something that you're interested in as well, then architecture could be for you. Jake, I don't know if you have anything to add for any of those. I think maybe if you have some other kind of insider input would be great as well.
Sorry, I was going to go back, but I don't think I have much to add. But I think the thing that I would say is that there's, as Ken was kind of running through there, there's subsets of architecture that you can really specialize in. But there's also certainly a way to be kind of a generalist. And if all of those things, every kind of part of architecture excites you, that's certainly, that's great too. And I think our office specifically, we pride ourselves on being a group of people who, while some might have more interest in certain areas, of just being really, really well-rounded designers, with everyone kind of capable and able to work in every phase and aspect of a project. And we see a lot of value in that. So it's, we're not, some people aren't only kind of pigeonholed into only ever doing construction administration, or we have people who are at times project designers, and then project architects and project managers. It's the more like the client side. And so that there's a lot of variety that can be found in this profession. It certainly doesn't ever really get mundane. Things are always changing, and you're always working on different aspects, and every client and every project and every team is really different. Before we jump into questions, we were going to share two of the programs that we use pretty frequently. I need to see how let's see, I think I can do this and that. Are we seeing SketchUp now?
We're seeing your beautiful sunset. Or
night sky.
Night sky, yeah.
Okay, let me, oh, there we go. I have to click share.
There you go.
Are you seeing it now? Okay. So this is a program that we in our office use, and all offices or all people kind of work differently. So even within our office, many people have different design processes to get from concept design, as Ken was talking about, and through schematic design into design development. But one thing we tend to use kind of in unison in our office is Sketchup as a way to develop ideas that maybe were started with hand models or sketches or watercolors or whatever medium people like to work in. Eventually that starts to get developed in SketchUp. This is a program in which we can look at a lot of different options really quickly as the design is evolving. It's also the program that we use to render, so to create really nice images of what the project is going to look like for the client and for neighborhoods, and for the process called design review, where there's a city council that reviews the design and has to approve it. And so this is a project out in Boise that's just wrapping up construction called CAR-T, or now Hearth. And it's a large multifamily residential building with a lot of amenities and some commercial retail space on the ground floor. And so this is a kind of a fully developed project in SketchUp that they've been using through construction administration. Even at that phase, there's a lot of back and forth between our documents and this to ensure that design intent is being met as the project progresses. And so this allows us to look at the project and from a lot of different angles and create kind of views like this that we would then render with light and shadow and reflection and people, and really kind of bring to life to show what the project will be. And it's amazing sometimes when you put these models of rendering side by side with a finished project and how much it really does look like it. It allows us to kind of zoom in and study kind of different spaces and how materials come together, how transitions happen. Similar here, that this building the shape of the building is a big Z, and there are these moments where kind of the angles come together with the rest of the building, and so having the ability to really jump in here and go back and forth between detailing and looking at this and making sure that things actually align how we want them and things are clean as they come together is really important. And then this program also allows us to kind of jump into interior spaces, and so looking here at the resident lobby of this space, and there's a lounge area and a fireplace, and there's some connectivity to what's happening upstairs and a reception desk. And so it allows us to kind of get both the exterior, but also dive into the interior and make sure that all those spaces are working together. And there's a couple more images here of this project. There's a large roof deck and some amenities, a fitness area, kind of a lounge. I believe there's a yoga studio. And so it allows us to kind of look through all of that and iterate really quickly and share our work with each other in a way that everyone can kind of understand. And then from here, well, they're developed kind of in unison, but Ken is going to talk about the other program that we use that's a bit more technical in nature.
Yeah, right. Let me see. Oh, geez. Where do I go? Share screen. You see the Revit model? Does that look right, Jake?
Yep, looks right.
Okay. So a lot of times we work in conjunction with a Revit model, which is a BIM modeling program, building information modeling. So it's all three-dimensional development that we're doing in this program. And this is a program that we use for our construction documents. And this is where we kind of take what was developed in SketchUp and bring it into Revit sometimes, or we just develop it concurrently with SketchUp to start to develop a floor plan and a building as we go along. And I'm going to click through a couple different images so that you can see kind of the process. But generally what we try to do is start with a really basic floor plan Although this is a project that's starting construction now, so it's a little further on than basic. But essentially what we would do is lay out all the walls and start to define the spaces and lay out the doors and, you know, start to look at clearances and make sure we're meeting all code requirements again and any accessibility requirements. But begin to populate these floor plans with different elements. And we would go back and forth to the client to present these at a weekly or monthly meeting to make sure that we're on the right track, make sure we're covering everything. And we also meet with our consultants, our mechanical, electrical, plumbing consultants, to talk through mechanical work as well as structural, to understand where columns need to go and how those columns interact with ductwork or plumbing lines. And in a building like this, there's a lot of ductwork that's going through, and there's a lot of structure that needs to be, coordinated. So eventually the floor plan will look like this. Lots of notes, lots of dimensions. Actually, let me go to a better one here. The floor plan will start to look like this. So this is a blow up of that north portion of the building. So we're starting to look at dimensions. We're tagging doors, tagging walls, and these are all coded items that refer to other sheets in the drawings to tell the contractor what this element is, what its size is, what its function is as far as the hardware that goes in the door, what it's made of, and like the wall types tell you what this building, this wall assembly is made of. So typically we've got chip sheetrock on two sides, and this one's a metal stud. So all of these wall types start to get into that. And that's really the minutia of what we get into with these documents as we move along. Thinking about where structure sits, and this is a column that we really don't want to see, so we box it in so it's concealed and hidden. Really understanding the requirements of the black box space here that we have for this portion of the building, and looking at ways to make sure that we're accommodating everything that we need into the space. And this building is pretty unique because it's got a black box and a recital hall. So there's a lot of different things that are going into this project as a whole. And once you can kind of see the level of detail that we have here. And then once we go into another drawing, that level of detail gets bumped up even more. So we start to locate, steps in the seating, and really dial into how all the stuff goes together and the relationships between adjacent elements as well. So as we're developing floor plans, we're also developing building sections and elevations. And building sections I always really enjoy building sections because it gives you a great idea as to what the spaces really look like. So this is a section that's cutting through the north-south end of the black box in the theater, and also the gallery. So those are the three main elements that we have in the building. And you can really get a great idea of scale in each of these spaces. So this is a typical door. It's 7 feet tall. So you can get an idea of how big that volume is and how big this recital hall is, and start to look at all the elements that go inside the recital hall. We've got catwalks. We've got a control room in the back with a projection screen, lots of seating. There's lots of structure underneath supporting all that seating. We have spaces underneath so ducts can be routed so that the inside of the space is acoustically sound and dialed in as we can get it. And you get to see the relationships from one space to the next. The next step up from a building section would be a wall section. So this is where we kind of dial in even more how things go together. And so the wall sections start to show you the assembly pieces and all the elements that go into a wall. So we start to see the concrete decking for the floor. You start to see the structure that's tied in, that supports the wall above and the floor that runs horizontally. And at that point, there's another level of detail that we dial in. So it's this constant magnifying of space. So this is where we start to get into really how that one detail works, how the flashing ties into the wood siding coming down, and how this light interacts with that flashing, and how the flashing connects to the brick, and how all this flashing ties back to the building structure. So there's this level and variation of detail and refinement that goes into every single project that ends up with a document that sometimes has up to 100+ pages, if not more. And see, at the end of the project, let's see, there's a 3D. We get a model that looks something like this. So in kind of in shape and scale and texture, it's similar to what's in SketchUp. It just takes a little more time to get there, and it's a little more involved and a little more exacting in how we do things, because it's got to be something that a contractor can build from. And so yeah, it's kind of the evolution of SketchUp to BIM to construction documents. But at the end of the day, we produce documents that are going to be used in the field for a lot of different people to build off of. So they need to be really clear, thoughtful, and as complete as possible, knowing that we're never perfect. We always miss things, but try to be as close to complete as we can. So I think with that, I think we could probably jump back, Jake, to you and go to the questions comment or questions section. And maybe we don't need the, I don't know if we need the presentation.
Yeah, I think the last slide was just says questions. So we can probably just keep our faces up and
yeah,
answer any questions that there are.
So we have some questions in the chat. Do you want me to read it, or you're going to read it on the chat?
If you want to go ahead and read them out one at a time, that might be
okay.
less
So
confusing.
the first one is, do all architects need to have a master's degree?
No, they do not. So the four kind of career options that I went through, the only one there that doesn't allow for licensure is, which is my understanding, and Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but this has always been my understanding, is a 4-year Bachelor of Arts in Architecture. That degree would then require additional education in a master's program to then become licensed eventually through the AIA, the American Institute of Architects. There is a 5-year bachelor's program that does allow licensure. And so that's a professional program at 5 years. It's a Bachelor of Architecture, not a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture. So there's a subtle difference there. But that degree does allow for licensure. I know lots of people in the field that both at our office and friends of mine and who went that route and did a 5-year program. And so the master's program is some people, it's something that they just desire to do to progress their education more, but oftentimes it's someone went to a school that didn't have a 5-year Bachelor of Architecture, and so they go into a 2-year Bachelor of or Master of Architecture, or like me, wasn't sure. I applied to architecture programs out of high school, but wasn't committed to it and wasn't sure. And so I got a degree in something else and then decided, no, I really do want to go to architecture school. And so I did a 3-year program.
Yeah, if I could add on to that quickly. When I went to college, I wanted to go into architecture, but I didn't really have anybody kind of guiding me on how to do that and what the proper path was. So I went to a university that had a 4-year non-accredited degree. And I didn't know that. I thought I could just graduate from college and then take a test and become an architect. And I didn't realize until I was sophomore, junior, that you had to have an accredited degree. So then I had to start making plans to either wait. I think it was like a 13-year process that you have to wait before you can actually take the exams of working in the profession. Maybe that's changed now. Or I could go to a master's program for 2 years and take my test and become an architect. And I know they've changed that quite a bit over the years, but that was kind of my story. So I would say if you are interested in becoming an architect, really make sure that the school you're going to is the right school and has the right program for you.
Yeah, and one more thing there, because Ken, you kind of hinted at it, but one thing we didn't touch on was the licensure process, which maybe we should talk about quickly, because so just because you graduate from an accredited program with a degree that allows you to get licensed you're not a licensed architect right away. I'm at this point not a licensed architect. Ken is. There through the AIA, there's a program called the ARE, which is the Architecture Registration Exams. Is that right? I always get it wrong. So we're currently on ARE 5.0, and so there are currently 6 national exams that you have to take and pass in order to become licensed, along with AXP, Architectural Experience Hours, that you have to achieve in certain categories to become licensed. So it takes, if you're right out of school really aggressively trying to get licensed, you can do it in probably 2 or 3 years. In the case of someone like me, 5 years in, I have more than enough hours, but haven't taken my exams. And that in some cases that can be a hindrance to your career. And in the case of me and like where we work, it hasn't been, and I've been able to really grow in my career into leadership roles on teams, and certainly something that I still plan to do, but it takes an additional commitment outside of school to get there. And it can take a long time for a lot of people, because if it's not kind of at the forefront for you coming out of school, it can be easy to push off. So it's an important thing to know about the profession as well.
So I think the other question ties with that, like what's something everyone should know before going into architecture. And so we have middle school on this call also, and what do they should know
About going into architecture?
Yes.
I think Jake touched on it. It's something that you've got to really be passionate about. It's, I want to be honest about it. It can be a challenging career. There's a lot of time spent developing things that somebody else may not like, and they may not have a real strong reason for not liking it. But we all do it because we love it. We love the creativity. We love the interaction. We love the daily challenge, and we love the diversity in being an architect. So I think if that's something that you're really willing to do and really want to challenge yourself every day to learn something new, I think there's a lot of professions out there that you learn something new every day, but I think architecture is one of those things where you really learn something new every single day, and it really pushes you to be your best that you can be. And for me, I love the challenge of learning new things, and I'm not the kind of person that would want to do the same thing day in, day out. So architecture is a good fit for me in that aspect.
The other question is, would 3D modeling software be used a lot at work?
Yeah, that's a lot of what we do. And so I shared the Sketchup program, so that's all 3D modeling. There are others. There's Rhino and a number of other programs that folks use. We in our office use Sketchup, and so we spend a lot of time in that in the early phases of the project. And then the program that Ken was showing, while it looked like it was all two-dimensional and floor plans and two-dimensional details, all of that is creating three-dimensional model as you're drawing it. And so we tend to, in that program, we tend to work more in 2 dimensions, but everything has a height and a volumetric quality to it.
Another
So
question.
I would say it's like 60% of our time is probably spent in 3D modeling software, just to give it a rough estimate.
Okay, and another question is, do you do one project at a time, start to finish, or then move on to another project, or multiple projects at once?
I think that really varies. Right now, I think I'm working on 3 different projects. I'm working on an apartment building that's in schematic design early on. I'm working on Performing Arts Center that's in construction. And I'm working on a roof renovation that's going out to bid right now. So I think it kind of depends on the scale of the project's experience level as well. But it varies. There was times where I was only working on one project, and that was the only thing I was doing for a year and a half. So it depends on what the office needs at the time and what your skill set is.
Yeah, I think the experience thing is an important one there. So right out of school, I worked on the same project for 2.5, 3 years, which was one featured a lot in this presentation called 72 Foster. And it was an amazing experience that allowed me to see pretty much every phase of the project, and I saw it through construction. And that then kind of allowed me to then start to work on multiple things at a time. And that's not always the case, but since then, the last 2 years, I've worked for varying amounts of time on 7 or 8 different projects. And then for the last year, I've been primarily on one that's now in construction. But I was the project architect on that. And now as it goes into construction, I'm working on that a couple of days a week. And I have 2 or 3 other projects that I'm working on currently at the moment. So there will be times when you're really like heads down and really focused on one project for a period of time. And then there were others where you have to really manage splitting your time, and one project will be in construction and the other one will be in, early design, and one you might be drawing construction documents for. And so you have to be able to kind of switch back and forth all of those and manage your time. But that can also be really fun because you're getting a lot of variety on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And what high school subjects or college courses have you found the most to be helpful?
I don't know if I didn't take this in high school, and I wish I did, but I wish I had taken some kind of debate class or public speaking class. I think that's one of the things that I really kind of struggle with professionally, of like sharing ideas clearly and succinctly. I think that's a skill set that gets overlooked a lot in our profession. There's a lot of people with great ideas, but you have to be able to explain those ideas in a way that everyone can understand, because not everyone's an architect, and we rarely talk to other architects whenever we're presenting projects. So we need to find ways to present those ideas in a manner that can be understood by everyone, and we're not just talking to our cohorts. An architectural conversation with Jake would be different than it would be to a client that isn't an architect. So that would be my recommendation.
That's a great one. I never really thought of that, and having done some debate in college and stuff, and realizing maybe that was helpful because it can be difficult. I'd also say something that I didn't really focus on. I think like art classes are great for learning how to express things, but more specifically, one thing that I wish I had done more of was like shop or something more physical in nature, because you spend a lot of time, especially in school, if you're talking about high school in preparation for college, spend a lot of time making, and having a basis already of understanding how to take an idea and represent it physically, I think is a really useful skill that you develop in architecture school. But if you come in with some skills in that area already, I think it could be really helpful.
And then the other question is, do you meet with real estate agents or other people who work in housing development?
We don't necessarily meet with real estate agents a lot, but pretty much all of our clients, or a large majority of them, are developers. And so there are people with varying backgrounds, but they're the ones who kind of guide the project through, procurement of land, selecting an architect, which then helps to select the design team, selecting a contractor. They have what we call a program for the project. And so they'll often come to us with an idea of what they need the project to be. And that's typically tied to what's called a pro forma. And so it's a program. We need a certain number of units and certain square footage with a budget to kind of make a project profitable. And that tends to vary a lot depending on whether it's a private developer or a nonprofit developer doing affordable housing. Their end goals are quite different. And so depending on which developer you're working with, the process and the conversation is quite different. And then we also work, the project Ken was showing is a project at Oregon State University. And sometimes we're working for an entity like that that's not really a developer, that has a different set of interests. But we do work very, very closely with the developers that we work with. It's a really important relationship, and it's really important to develop trust there. And we love to work with recurring clients. So we love when it's not just a one-time project, but we have a lot of clients who come back to us because we've developed really good relationships with them, and we trust them and they trust us. And so we're able to do some really amazing work together.
Which phase of your work do you like the best and what you don't like?
I think for me, I really enjoy SD because everything's kind of loose and open, and there's a lot of room for investigation. But I also enjoy CA. I really like, again, being out in the field and seeing everything be constructed. I think my least favorite is construction documents. That just gets to be a bit of a grind at times, and there's a lot of redundancy in it as well. I think it's one of the most critical parts of the documentation, but it's also can be tough at times.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the most stressful. The most stressful period, but it's also, as you said, very important. And there are aspects of construction documents that I really enjoy. Like I love drawing details, which is when you like really are zoomed in on a condition and how certain materials and structure come together. But then there's other parts of creating a documented set for construction that I like going through and dimensioning everything and tagging walls and the stuff that can be a little bit monotonous, but is really important. I also love early design. I think not every architect does, I should clarify, but I think a lot of people really enjoy that part of a project and really being able to be imaginative and think about what this project might be. And I also I really enjoy CA as well. So I guess fairly similar to Ken. My least favorite, it's not really a phase, but my least favorite project or part of a project is value engineering, which Ken spoke about briefly. But it's like we put so much effort into making something the way we think it should be, and then oftentimes, as you can imagine, money becomes a concern for the client and how much it's going to cost. And so the value engineering process of trying to maintain design intent but cutting a lot of money from the project can be a tough time for us designers. We put so much thought and energy into stuff, and then to have to rethink it and go with a different, less expensive material or cut space, or that part can be really difficult.
Yeah, it becomes a really heartbreaking time a lot of times. That's a good point. It's really tough.
Yeah.
So how did you realize that you wanted to become an architect, or what made you realize that architecture was fit for you?
I think it's probably a cliche, but I mean, as a kid, love Legos and just building things. I love looking at houses in the neighborhood and drawing houses and drawing different things and kind of really looking at spaces and trying to create cool spaces for myself as a kid. So I think a lot of that exploration started early on with that hands-on construction. And as I got older, learning about architects like Frank Lloyd Wright and, kind of the really famous ones like Corbusier and Frank Gehry, that kind of opened my eyes that there's a whole nother world out there that's of imaginative, creative people that do really amazing things with building and designing spaces that we all live in and interact with.
Yeah, similar to Ken, I also just loved like making things when I was a child, and I liked Legos, but I think Lincoln Logs were my go-to. But I then also was fortunate enough to travel to Europe a number of times when I was in high school, and that really started to develop a passion for me. But then going into undergrad, I didn't really want to kind of pigeonhole myself, and so I felt architecture was a very specific degree, and I wanted to go in a little bit more general. But then through my studies, I have a big passion for sustainability, for the environment, and so I started to view architecture as a impactful way to or a good way to kind of impact our environment in a positive way, and that we need to rethink a lot of parts of our practice. and how we design buildings. And so that kind of led me back to architecture. So I love both the artistic side of it and the historical side and form making. And but I also love the kind of the technical side with, how do we make more sustainable buildings?
Do architects travel for work, or do you travel for work?
Yeah, travel varies. A lot of our work currently is not too far. I think we've been getting a lot of work in Idaho the past few years. So there's a few folks that travel to Idaho once a month or so to do site visits. And every once in a while, we'll get a project request in California or Arizona or New Mexico or some other place. And people will travel to that. But there's not typically a whole lot of travel. I mean, it really depends on what kind of office you're in and what kind of work they do. I'll be traveling a lot to Corvallis in the next couple of years, but that's about the extent of my travel.
Yeah, and I'll be traveling up to Washougal, Washington, a fair amount. But we have a current project up in Capitol Hill in Seattle, and I think some future work in Montana. And so, but for us, it tends to be a little bit more regional. A number of years ago, we did 3 or 4 projects in Amherst, Massachusetts. But we teamed up at that point to work with a local architect there to do a lot of the on-site work, so that we weren't traveling across the country a ton. And if you get into larger architecture firms, so we're 40, low 40s, 43, 44 people, kind of a smaller firm that's done a majority of our work in Portland. If you get to some of the really big firms like Perkins and Will or HOK, or there's a bunch, but they tend to have regional offices. So Perkins and Will I think they're technically the largest architecture firm in the world. They do amazing work, but they have offices in Seattle, LA. I think they have one in Texas. They have one in Atlanta and Boston and Chicago. And so they have a lot of different arms. And so the Seattle office tends to work on projects in the Pacific Northwest, and then the Chicago office has the Midwest. And so there's if you're at that scale of firm, you don't travel very far very often, because they're able to have a regional kind of reach.
And another question is, what exactly does it mean to be a licensed architect? In addition to that, when you are a licensed architect, is it licensed for the whole United States, or is it just a certain state?
That's an excellent question. So the way it works right now is you get your license, and then you get registered in a state. So right now I'm registered in the state of Oregon. I did my undergrad in Texas, but I registered in the state of Oregon. So each state has, most states have different requirements. I know California is a little more strict and stringent. So if I wanted to get licensed in the state of Oregon, or California, apologies, there would be another test that I would have to take, a jurisprudence test. And it's a lot more involved and deals with a lot of seismic questions and things that state has to deal with typically. But being a registered architect means that there's a little more liability in the work that we do. I get a stamp, although I don't stamp drawings because I work at an office that has partners that do all the stamping of the drawings. So being an architect really, it allows you to maybe potentially go out on your own and do your own thing, and kind of investigate things by yourself. You can stamp your own drawings if they're over a certain size of building. The other kind of caveat to it is technically you're not supposed to call yourself an architect or advertise yourself as an architect unless you're a registered architect. And I think the American Institute of Architects, AIA, has really cracked down on that quite a bit over the years. And what they don't want is people misleading the public thinking that they are an architect when they're not, because there is a rigor that's involved in becoming an architect and passing the exams. And there's a level of responsibility in being that type of professional. It's similar to being a lawyer or a doctor. There's a higher level of regard that people in that profession have to have to deal with. But that said, what I do on a daily basis isn't different than what Jake does. It's pretty much the same.
Yeah. So like Ken is an architect because he's gone through the process and is licensed. My kind of title is designer, but I've served in a more like technical leadership role in a project, but under our quality director, who is the one stamping the drawing. So I kind of work with her permission to develop documents that she ultimately has to approve and stamp and put her name behind. So there's a lot of trust and that goes into that too. If you're in that position as a licensed architect, very few licensed architects, unless you're doing small scale like residential, draw everything themselves. And so you have a team of people under you, and there's a whole part of understanding in that and being licensed that those folks are working for you with your permission, but there's a responsibility to understand what's going into the documents, and you're the one officially kind of stamping that yes, these are accurate and meet code, and so yeah, there's a high level of responsibility if you're that person.
There's one more thing I want to add to that. When you do become an architect, you have to do continuing education every year. So you have to get a certain amount of credits, and I think it's like 18 for national and 24 for local hours of continuing education. And for the most part, it's really just keeping up to date on code updates, materials, products, that sort of thing. It's relatively easy to maintain and manage, but it's something that we have to do, and we have to prove and show every year at the end of the year.
So one last more question, and it's a really, really good event because we went over the time, but one more question. Is there a bizarre project request that you have to design, or you refuse to design?
That's a good one. We're certainly very selective in the projects that we do. We're fortunate as a firm to not be in a place where we're just going to take anything request that comes through the door. And so we tend to be very selective about the project types and who the client is and what their demands are for a project. We certainly have had some projects where I think the opening slide of this one, the project One North in North Portland, where we started the development of that project, and then the client saw some work by Anthony, I can always forget his name, but Gaudi, a famous Spanish architect who designed La Sagrada Familia, if you know it, but very expressive, kind of curvy architecture. And so that's how that project ended up having a ton of different kind of curves and angles on it, because Gaudi's work left a kind of a big impression on him, and he was interested in making something that was really expressive. And so, but we took that as an opportunity to then make an amazing project. But there are certainly, like, along the way, there are definitely some interesting requests that come our way, even with clients that we've worked with a lot, where we have to kind of think on our feet and like, okay, like that's different. How do we make that happen? And that's honestly part of the fun and part of the joy of it.
All right, so that is it. Thank you so much for volunteering your time and talking to students.
Awesome. It was great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you all, and good luck.
Yeah.